Okay, so in today's topic, I kind of want to talk about the pros and cons of being a self-taught artist opposed to being an artist that has trained at a classical art academy, right? Um, and so I myself am mostly, I would say, self-taught. A lot of the techniques I learned was just sort of based on my own research. I did have a little bit of tuition from an artist who trained in Russia. He was a, a graduate from the Moscow Architectural Institute, and he was. This was a couple of years ago, but he was doing online tuition, and I took him up on that. So I did a few classes of that with him, and he taught me a lot about perspective and thinking about three-dimensional forms a little bit differently. So uh, I'm mostly self-taught, but I have had some tuition here and there, which has helped. But I don't have any kind of formal art training background as such. And I used to kind of lament that. Like, I used to lament about how I would never really have the opportunity to train at these classical art academies like the ones you see in Florence or some parts of London and North America, because it just wasn't financially possible for me to do so. And so as a result of that, I was just left to my own devices. And yeah, it was kind of something that didn't sit well with me for a very long time. And because I remember that when I was in my mid 20s, which is probably about the time I started learning perspective drawing properly and human anatomy and things like that. Uh, in my mid 20s, I kind of noticed that my art was not getting better. Um, I was only copying from photos, and I was kind of going down the route of hyperrealism, where you're just copying photos and that's it. You know, you're not really creating anything from imagination. And the reason I was copying from photos so much was because I just didn't know how to draw from imagination, and that just really bothered me because like this figurative piece that you're seeing on the screen right now, this is the kind of stuff I always wanted to draw. Like I always wanted to draw large scale compositions with hundreds of figures in a landscape, or maybe there's a bit of architecture in the background or whatever, but just, huge figurative compositions was always the kind of stuff that I wanted to draw. And I could just never do it because couldn't I couldn't even imagine a scene like this a few years ago, let alone draw it. So it always bothered me that I would never have the opportunity to go to these classical art academies, because I thought that if I went to these art academies, I would improve as an artist, and I would, know the secrets of drawing and painting and composition, which is kind of true to a degree, but not quite. So I kind of just carried on, and I came to terms with the fact that I would never go to Florence or wherever and learn at these academies. It was just completely out of my reach. And so I kind of just did the next best thing, where I would try to learn about a subject simply by Googling it, like I would Google perspective drawing and see if I could find any books or information, whether it was a book or an ebook or maybe even a YouTube video. I would kind of just try to learn by myself and just see if I could dig up any information on the subject, which was certainly helpful at the time. And I did this with everything, like I did this with figure drawing, I did this with human anatomy, I did this with architecture. If there was any subject I was interested in, I would immediately go on the internet and I would just Google it and see what was out there and see if I could dig up any good books along the way. And I think in hindsight, I think it was probably the best thing that I ever did for my art practice, Um, I held this belief for a very long time that you had to train at a classical art academy to get good at drawing or painting, right? And I've come to realize that that's actually not necessarily true. Um, there was a guy that I met in the city where I live. He actually worked at the local art store, and funnily enough, he actually went to one of these art academies. And I got into a bit of a conversation with him, and I was asking what was it like. And he was training at this academy in Florence. And what was funny was he was following me on Instagram, and he was looking at my work, and he said that he really liked my drawings and that he wished he could draw like me. And I just found that really kind of interesting because I thought, him having a academic drawing background, I thought he'd be getting the best education in the world. And he told me that that wasn't exactly the case. Um, See, the thing about these art academies, especially in the West, I don't think it's true for Russia. I think Russian art academies are probably the best in the world, but we can talk about those later. But these Western art academies in places like Florence and London, New York, he said they only teach you how to copy. Like, they teach you how to draw from life. They'll get you working on the bark plates and the still life, drawing from casts, doing charcoal drawings, and then oil paintings in grisaille. And then eventually you move on to the full human figure. The curriculum for these art academies is usually the same. They kind of follow that curriculum. But he said to me, they don't actually teach you much about perspective. And if they do, it's incredibly basic. And they never taught him how to draw from imagination. Now, if you're not bothered about drawing from imagination and you're fine with drawing from references, then that's totally okay. Then I think the art academies would serve you well because they'll teach you how to draw from a reference properly. And they'll help you train your eye. But for me, that was kind of a revelation because I thought, well, that's interesting. I don't really see the point in learning how to copy, even if you can do it extremely accurately. I just don't see the point, because I think the ultimate goal for any artist is to develop your own compositions and to, draw effectively from imagination, whatever the subject may be. And he told me that, they didn't really teach that. They teach you how to train your eye to see things, but they don't really teach you how to think three-dimensionally. So that was quite an interesting insight that I never considered. And so looking back on that, I kind of realized that me being self-taught and just digging up and researching techniques on my own was really a blessing in disguise. And so I think there's pros and cons to each approach to this. If you take the art academies, for instance, I mean, the pro obviously is that you can learn from instructors who have years of experience, and they have a curriculum that's set out for you to follow, and they can train you from the ground up within a matter of maybe 2 to 3 years, right? So that's obviously a good thing. I mean, it's good to learn from instructors. But I think the cons of going to these art academies is that their curriculum is very restrictive. I don't really think you have much opportunity to experiment outside of what they're teaching you while you're studying there. And you can kind of notice that in some of the paintings and the drawings of some of the students that study at these academies. You can kind of see how, while on a technical level, the drawings and the paintings they're producing look very realistic, on the other hand, they all do kind of look the same as well. It's always portraits and nudes and maybe the odd still life here and there. And, I'm not trying to knock it, like I'm not putting their work down. I think the paintings that they produce are really, really good. But to be honest, if you looked at the body of work of one student that went to those academies and then you looked at the body of work from another student that went to the same academy, you'd probably not be able to differentiate between the two. And I think that's why I like the Russian academies and their approach to art, because they do take perspective a lot more seriously, and they do take drawing from imagination much more seriously. They still learn from life, but they draw a lot more constructively, which is what helps you to think three-dimensionally. They take art way more seriously, I think, in the St. Petersburg Academy, just in general. The Western art academies, I'm not going to name any, but you know what they are, you know who they are. And I think from my own research, I think generally their curriculum is, you're meant to complete the course in a matter of 3 years or 4 years, maybe. But in the St. Petersburg Academy of Art, it's actually 8 years. That's from my own research. I think it's 8 years, so maybe don't quote me on that, but it's an 8-year course. So that just goes to tell you just how in-depth the Russian academies are compared to the Western counterparts. But getting back on topic, so art academies, right? It's like you are learning from instructors that have experience in oil painting and drawing or whatever it may be. But the curriculum is rather restrictive based on what I've seen and from what I've heard. And maybe that's a good thing. In one sense, it keeps you on the straight and narrow. It keeps you focused, and you can work your way from objective to objective. But I think by the end of it, the work that you produce is, well, first of all, they're only going to teach you to copy what you see, which, if you want to be a portrait artist, that's great. That's incredible. That's what you need to do. But if you want to be an illustrator or a concept artist, for example, then just copying is not really going to be enough for your art practice, right? So then let's talk about being a self-taught artist, and I can speak from experience since that's basically what I did. I guess the obvious pro about being a self-taught artist is that you don't have to follow a restrictive curriculum. If you're interested in a subject, you can just go and research it right away. You have the internet at your fingertips. You can find any information you're looking for if you look hard enough. It might take you a while. It might take you a lot longer, but it's definitely out there. So if you're interested in architecture, you can research that. And if you're interested in drawing animals and human figures, you can research animal and human anatomy. And if you want to get good at landscape painting, you can do that too. There's really nothing to stop you from learning whatever you want. But I think the con to that is, well, it's the same reason why it's such a strength, right? The strength of being self-taught is that there's no strict curriculum. But the con is that there is no curriculum, right? So you are kind of left to your own devices, and you can spend many years kind of going down a rabbit hole with some subjects. And you can get pretty carried away with learning whatever topic it is that you may be learning, and you might not be getting closer to your art goals. Perspective drawing for me was a rabbit hole. I've read heaps of books and watched many video lessons on the topic, and it's a subject that you're always going to learn. But I think though I came to a certain point where it was almost like I was learning a bit too much, and it wasn't really improving my artwork in any meaningful way, because I was so immersed in perspective drawing and studying the laws of perspective. I was neglecting human anatomy. I was neglecting landscape painting. I was neglecting drawing architecture. I just found that I was getting a bit too carried away. So I think the best advice that I can give to you, if you are self-taught and you're teaching yourself how to draw and researching these techniques on your own, is try to have a specific goal in mind. Like, think about some of your favorite artists and the drawings and the paintings that they produced, and then try to think about the subjects that you need to learn in order to get to that level, right? So for me, I loved the Russian artists like Vasily Surikov and Repin, um, like massive multi-figure compositions, right? I just loved their paintings. And so I thought in order to get to their level, I would have to learn human anatomy, I would have to learn landscapes. If there was a building in the painting, then maybe I would have to learn classical architecture too, as well as perspective. And it's not like you have to master these subjects, you just have to get a little bit good at each one. And so that would be probably the best advice that I can give to you if you are a self-taught artist.